In 2024, a hardware store in Australia made more profit per square meter than Tesla. It outsold Woolworths' best performing supermarket. It crushed every domestic rival, then proceeded to humiliate one international one. It is owned by a Perth-based conglomerate that also sells coal. And on a Saturday morning, 4 out of every 10 Australian adults will, at some point, end up walking into one. This is the story of Bunnings. On the surface, Bunnings looks unremarkable. Big green sheds, concrete floors, trolleys with one slightly possessed wheel. But underneath that is one of the most disciplined retail operations on the planet, and 3 specific decisions made decades apart that turned a regional Western Australian timber merchant into a category killer that no domestic or international competitor has been able to dent. By the end of this video, you'll know what those 3 decisions were, why the second one nearly cost a different company $3 billion, and why the third one, the one almost nobody talks about, is the one that actually matters. Stick around for that, or do not. We are not the boss of you. The story begins in 1886. 2 English brothers, Arthur and Robert Bunning, arrive in Perth, a colonial outpost on the wrong side of a continent, with a population smaller than a contemporary suburban shopping center. Western Australia is in the middle of a building boom, and timber is the bottleneck. The brothers buy into a sawmill and begin supplying the local construction trade. For the next 60 years, they expand, slowly, regionally, unglamorously. Mills, hardware shops, builders' merchants. The kind of business you inherit, not the kind you get a documentary about. By the 1980s, Bunnings is a respectable mid-size operator, a couple of $100 million in revenue, a few dozen sites, and roughly the same growth ambitions as a comfortable accountant nearing retirement. Then, in 1990, Bunnings makes a quiet acquisition that changes everything and immediately gets noticed by a much larger predator. That predator is Wesfarmers, a century-old Perth cooperative that began life-selling fertilizer to wheat farmers, and which by the early 90s has decided, with the calm energy of a man buying a yacht, that it would quite like to own a retailer. In 1994, Wesfarmers buys Bunnings outright. That is decision number 1. And on its own, it changes nothing. What matters is what Wesfarmers does next. In the early 1990s, Wesfarmers executives quietly fly to the United States. They visit a chain that, at the time, almost no Australian had heard of, Home Depot. They walk through warehouses the size of football fields. They watch tradespeople loading utes. They count SKUs. They time customers. They do all of this with the focused, slightly disturbing attention of a man memorizing the layout of a casino. They come home convinced. The future of hardware retail is not the corner shop. It is the warehouse. And so begins decision number 2. Wesfarmers takes the existing Bunnings business, the small shops, the regional sites, the timber yards, and starts replacing them, one by one, with enormous green sheds. Each one stocks something in the order of 45,000 individual products. Each one carries the same prices, in the same aisles, in roughly the same layout, whether you walk into a store in central Sydney or a regional town 3 hours from anywhere. They guarantee the lowest price on every item. They will refund the difference plus 10% if you find it cheaper anywhere else. They mean it. Local hardware shops, the sort that had been running for 3 generations on the strength of knowing what you need, start closing. Mitre 10, the established cooperative, contracts. BBC Hardware is acquired and absorbed. Independent timber merchants disappear. Within a decade, Bunnings has gone from regional player to the dominant force in Australian hardware retail. It is now the largest non-food retailer in the country. It is also statistically the cheapest place to buy a brush cutter, an outdoor setting, or a sausage and bread. By 2010, Bunnings has eaten the Australian hardware market so completely that the only conceivable challenger has to come from outside the industry entirely. Enter Woolworths, Australia's largest grocery chain, flush with capital, watching Bunnings' margins, and doing the kind of strategic spreadsheet that ends with the words, "How hard can it be?" Woolworths partners with Lowe's, the second biggest hardware retailer in the United States, and in 2011 launches Masters Home Improvement. 3 billion Australian dollars are committed. 49 giant blue stores are opened. Television advertising blankets the country. Masters is going to do to Bunnings what Bunnings did to Mitre 10. Bunnings' response is, on paper, almost embarrassingly simple. They drop prices. They open more stores. They run the lowest price guarantee against Masters specifically and aggressively. They do not panic. They do not innovate. They do not, as far as anyone can tell, even change the air freshener in the toilets. 5 years later, in 2016, Woolworths announces it is closing Masters and exiting hardware entirely. Total losses to shareholders, when the dust settles, approximately $3.2 billion. Bunnings absorbs the carcass. It buys back 21 of the closed Masters sites at a discount, and it carries on almost identically to how it carried on before. Masters had a real chance. What Masters did not have was the operational discipline of a business that had spent 20 years compounding tiny logistics improvements while everyone else was distracted by retail conferences. Which brings us to decision number 3. Nothing teaches a business about its own success quite like trying to export it. In 2016, fresh from defeating Masters, Wesfarmers decides Bunnings is ready for the world, or specifically, the United Kingdom. They acquire Homebase, a struggling British home improvement chain with 265 stores, for £705 million. They begin converting Homebase stores into Bunnings stores, complete with the Australian color scheme, the warehouse format, the lowest prices guaranteed signage, and, in a moment of cultural confidence that historians will study for centuries, sausage sizzles in the car parks. The British public, who do not eat lunch in car parks, do not respond. The format is wrong, the product mix is wrong, the pricing strategy is wrong. The British DIY consumer, it turns out, is not the same animal as the Australian one. Within 20 months, Wesfarmers writes the entire investment down. They sell Homebase, the supposed acquisition target, for £1. Total UK loss, just over £1 billion. The lesson is brutal but instructive. The thing that made Bunnings unbeatable in Australia did not transplant. It was not the format, it was not the brand, it was not the sausage sizzle. It was decision number 3. Decision number 3 is not a decision in the usual sense. It is not a board meeting, or a flashy strategy day, or a quote on the front of an annual report. It is the decision, made at every level of the business, every day, for 30 straight years, to obsess over operations. Range. Bunnings carries roughly 45,000 individual products in a typical store. The closest international analog, Home Depot, carries about 35,000. Logistics. Every store is replenished from a network of regional distribution centers on a near-daily cycle, with stock turnover that grocers would recognize. Pricing. Every single product in every single store is repriced continuously against scraped competitor data to defend the lowest price promise. Staff. Most of the floor team are time-served tradespeople, not casual shelf stackers. They actually know what a Craig jig is. And the sausage sizzle? Yes, even that. Local community groups run the car park sausage sizzles, generating roughly $30 million a year for charities and turning every Bunnings car park into a small social institution that competitors literally cannot replicate without it looking weird. Each of these is small. 45,000 SKUs versus 35,000 is, on its own, not a moat. Lowest price on a brush cutter is, on its own, not a moat. But compounded together, over 30 years, run by a parent company whose internal religion is operational discipline, the result is a business that no competitor, domestic or international, well-funded or scrappy, has been able to match. That is decision number 3. And it is the one that almost nobody copies because it is not exciting. It is just hard. There is one final wrinkle. The decisions that built Bunnings, warehouse format, lowest price, operational compounding, are now being automated by Bunnings themselves, faster than any competitor can keep up. Pricing is no longer humans with spreadsheets. It is machine learning models, scraping competitor sites, and adjusting tens of thousands of SKUs every hour. Inventory replenishment is forecast by demand models that take the weather, the school holidays, and historical sales data into account before sending a truck. Every Bunnings store is, in effect, becoming a node in a much larger automated retail system, with humans running the floor and software running the spine. This is the part of the story that matters for almost every other retailer, because the moat that took Bunnings 30 years to build by hand is being widened in real time by automation. A small competitor cannot catch up by hiring more staff. They cannot catch up by opening more stores. They can only catch up by replicating the operational system. And that system is now mostly software. Which is the deeper lesson? Bunnings is not a hardware retailer that got lucky. It is a 30-year compounding operations machine wearing a hardware retailer's costume. And in the next 10 years, every dominant operator in every category will look more like Bunnings and less like the firms it killed. The format will change. The category will change. The color scheme, possibly even the sausage, will change. But the playbook will not. 3 decisions: adopt the warehouse format, defend the lowest price, compound operations for 30 years. 2 of those are obvious. The third is the one that built the empire. If this is the kind of breakdown you want more of, about the companies that quietly dominate categories most people never think about, subscribe. Next episode, how a Melbourne logistics company you have probably never heard of moves more freight than Australia Post. Thank you for watching.